there's a rule being circulated. Yeah. Yes, this and the review sheet are on Blackboard now. I'm going to send this off to the printers, and hopefully I get it back in time to distribute it Wednesday. So, let me go to this. So we saw that Descartes uses this conjecture, which some texts call as dream conjecture, to cast doubt on any beliefs he has based on what his senses tell him. And we saw that this enables him to cast doubt not only on common sense observations for him about what's going on in the room, but also you can extend those doubts to the information that the observational sciences give us. There were rudimentary, sciences of astronomy and chemistry and physics around even in Descartes' day. But as these are based on observations either with the naked eye or aided by instruments like telescopes and microscopes, I think I say this, this conjecture, I point this out, calls those into question. So he's raised a doubt on these things, but for people in Descartes' day, mathematics was considered a science. And so he says, well, I can't raise a doubt about arithmetic and geometry just by speculating that, hey, maybe it's all a dream. And why does he think this? Well, Descartes' convinced that the basic principles of math would still hold, even if they're about imaginary dream objects. In other words, if a square is an object in a dream, it's a dream square, it's not a real square, it's still got to have four sides. And the basic laws of geometry are going to apply. And Descartes says, look, basic arithmetic is going to work. If I dreamed, I don't know, let's say that I had 2 bars of gold plus 3 bars of gold. Suppose I had a dream that I was phenomenally wealthy. Even if those bars of gold were fictitious dream bars of gold, they would still equal 5. So he says, I can't use that to cast doubt on these. So does that mean these are beyond doubt? Now, he does find a way. But here again, remember, this is a part of philosophic method. The way he does this is going to seem really weird to you, especially, maybe it's timely since we're this close to Halloween. So he says, these sciences, arithmetic and geometry, are so certain, and indubitable means what? Indubitable. But beyond doubt, right? Something you can't doubt. He says, so far these seem beyond doubt, even if they were about fictitious dream objects. He says even fictitious objects might have real properties: extension, location, space, quantity, size, and number. Still, if I'm dreaming about 2 unicorns, then of a certain size and number is still going to apply even though they're imaginary objects. But, so he says, here's the principle. Things like mathematical beliefs are beyond doubt. Should I accept this, says Descartes, or can I raise a doubt even about these? Well, he asks, could anything cast doubt on such seemingly perfect knowledge? And I think Plato's answer would have been no. But Descartes finds a way. Could anything ever make me think I go wrong in adding 2 plus 3 or counting the sides of a square? And here's the way you have to think about this. The process of working out, say, a math problem. Now, I'm not asking for actual hands. This is a rhetorical question. But how many of you have ever gotten less than 100% on a math test? And if the answer is yes, that's happened before, well, usually it's because you screwed up somewhere along the way, right? You were working out a problem in algebra or something and you took a wrong step. Now, I remember when I was in, doing arithmetic in middle school and high school, the mistakes you always liked were the ones where you made 2 mistakes, not 1, but fortuitously they canceled each other out and you still came out with the right answer, and you drew a box around it, and sometimes you were lucky enough that the teacher didn't notice that you got the right answer but by making 2 wrong steps. The way, in other words, to kind of understand where Descartes is coming from on this is, well, have you ever, on your own, made a mistake on a math test? He says, how could I ever go wrong in adding 2 plus 3? Well, maybe not in adding 2 plus 3, but maybe adding something, more complex. And, you made a mistake. Well, now suppose that there is an evil entity who does not want you to do well in math class. And this evil genius, or evil demon, as some people call it, is kind of whispering in your ear, and he's throwing you off every time you try to do a math problem so that you systematically make mistakes and have wrong beliefs about math. Well, this is Descartes' conjecture. He says, I could throw a skeptical, theoretical doubt, even on truths of mathematics. He says, well, remember, Descartes in a Catholic country, he doesn't want to get himself in trouble, and besides, he needs God to bail him out in the end. But he says, if it seems inconsistent with God's goodness that he would deliberately deceive me like this, suppose I imagine some evil creature, like an evil demon or evil genius. If God's the source of goodness, why may I not instead be constantly deceived by some malicious demon? So basically, he's at a point now where he's questioned and casts doubts on everything his senses tell him about the world around him. He says a powerful enough demon could delude me in all my judgments about the reality of what my senses tell me as well, but also about abstract things like shapes, sounds. And he says, he could even delude me about things like whether I have a body. one of the ways that Descartes' point was made when I was in graduate school was by people who said, well, suppose you could have a human brain that supposedly can generate dream images, and it's hooked up, it's in a vat to keep it alive, and it's hooked up to things that nourish it, right? So from Descartes' perspective, even if we didn't have a body, even if we were all brains in a vat, which is not very far from where the Matrix puts these people, right? We could still theoretically have all the experiences we have now, only they would be generated by the mind, and we would be deceived in this. So he says all may be doubted if we posited this evil character. So at this point, I was half asleep, I was in bed listening to the radio. I was trying to go to sleep. I happened to be interested in the longest doggone series game to have ever been played. It lasted more than 5 hours, right? And teams kept coming back. I mean, I thought at one point Houston's toast. They just hit a 3-run homer, the Dodgers. That's it. But no, they came back twice. Anyway, what point am I trying to make? Well, at this point in our story, it seems like all is lost, right? But what would it be to find what Descartes is looking for? One shining example of a truth that is so true and so absolutely certain it cannot be doubted. Well, it would be like Archimedes. Now, Archimedes, I'm going to go over here. Archimedes made this claim and he said, look, theoretically, I mean, he was so enamored with what you and I all experienced in physics class, right? With levers and fulcrums and the ability of a lever to enable you to lift loads that you wouldn't lift without that tool, right? And Archimedes made the boast. He said, you know what? If I had a lever that was long enough, I could get enough leverage that I could even lift the earth. But what does he need to accomplish that task besides a long enough lever, if it could be done? He needs, and I put it there in the drawing, see that little black point on the line? In order to lift the earth, in order to have that tool do its job, he's got to have an immovable point to rest it on. And he says, finding the kind of absolute truth he's looking for would essentially be like Archimedes finding an immovable point. That is, it would give us a solid basis for knowledge that was absolutely certain. So Archimedes then claimed he could move the earth from one firm immovable point with a long enough lever. Descartes longs to find a certain unshakable truth on which to rest the whole of knowledge. And our story does have, at least for now, a happy ending, because he finds it. And he finds it in his certain knowledge of himself and his own existence. He says, how can I doubt my own existence? He says, even if my mind has created the world, even if I'm living in a dream world, even if I've authored my own thoughts, the one thing I can't get away from is that I'm here to do that. I have to exist in order for, as a thinking mind or soul, in order to do this. And even if there's some evil genius out to deceive me, and even if I'm deceived about everything in the world, and he's convinced me that all of this is fictitious, there's no world, no sky, no earth, not even other minds, not even bodies. I may be just a disembodied mind. Well, he says, in order for me to doubt all these things or be deceived about all these things, I have to be here to cast that doubt, or I have to be here to be deceived. So he says, the one thing I can't be deceived about is that I exist. And he says, even if there were some evil genius or evil demon that's constantly deceiving me, if I'm deceived about everything else, the one thing I can't doubt is that I am here to be deceived. I have to be around. And what is being deceived? What are doubting? Well, they're thoughts in the mind. They're mental operations. So Descartes says, the one thing I can't doubt is that I'm a thinking mind or soul. So he says, the proposition, that is the statement, we're not going to worry about the distinction some logicians make between propositions and statements. The statement, I am or I exist, he says, is necessarily true every time I think it or pronounce it. There's his Archimedean point, the indubitable axiom on which to base the rest of his philosophy. Now, the way you've heard it even before you ever took a philosophy course is the way he says it in a different book of his, not in the Meditations, but elsewhere. He expresses it as cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Right? So there's his indubitable axiom. Now here's where he pushes the frontiers of our understanding of the mind philosophically. He says, but what am I? He says this I of I am, I exist. What does the I refer to? What am I as a human being, as a mind, as a thinking mind? He says, you know what, I find the definition that Plato and Socrates were looking for, and even Aristotle. We saw this in Aristotle in his Ethics, right? He says, what are we essentially? We're rational beings. He says this definition of man in general, human beings as a rational animal, he says, well, I find this unhelpful. Doesn't tell us what rational is supposed to mean and what animal means. So he says this road raises more questions than it answers. So Descartes says, I'm not going down that classical road in thinking about what and who I am as a human being. He says, well, what did I believe before this point in my investigations? I believed I had a body, believed that I had a soul that performed various functions, like enabling me to be aware of the world around me, sense perception, thinking logically, enabled me to initiate bodily movements, right, to pick something up like a pen. By the way, this was left by somebody last week, if anybody recognized. But he says, I haven't given a lot of consideration to just what the soul is, except that it's like a wind or fire or the ether. Sometimes I like to talk about the luminous ether. That there was debate as to whether or not that's the medium through which radio waves travel 100 years ago, before Einstein proved it false. In other words, think about it. Waves are waves in some medium, right? If you throw a rock in a pond, you're going to get ripples coming out from where the rock went in. But if the pond were dried up, then you wouldn't get any ripples because there's no medium for the ripples to take place in. Well, the thought was if radio waves were waves, they must be waves in some medium. So the luminous ether was proposed. There was debate over whether it was a real fact of science that existed as a medium through which things like radio waves traveled. And Einstein proved it false. We're not going to go into how. But at any rate, so the nature, he says, of the body is clear. And here's where Descartes, you got to watch out. When these modern philosophers use the word body, sometimes they're ambiguous. You have to look at the context. Sometimes they just mean our physical bodies. But sometimes it's used as a mass term, as a synonym for matter, for material substance, for what this world is made out of. And he says material substance, and that's how it's being used here. The nature of matter is clear. It has shape, it's located in Newtonian space, occupies space to the exclusion of other bodies. Here he's just reflecting the science of his day. Perceivable, right? We can see a material thing or feel it, touch it. Capable of motion in space, right? I can move this pen from there to there as it's a material object. But at this point, he says, the existence of my body has come into doubt. See, right now, the only thing Descartes can prove philosophically is that he is a thinking thing. He's an immaterial spirit or soul. And his having a body is still in question. This is why he needs the ontological argument. We're coming to that in just a second. So, he says the deceiver can cast doubt on the normal properties of the body and what it can do. And I'm not going to rest very long on that. But what essentially am I? What does this I refer to? Well, he says, essentially, I am a thinking thing. Literally, he says a thinking thing, as it's translated into English. A mind an immaterial soul or spirit whose major property is thought. And this is what causes the mind-body problem. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but for Descartes, thoughts are not located in Newtonian space, and neither is the immaterial mind that has those thoughts. Why? A way of thinking about it is this. Houston won the series game last night. Now there's a thought. 2 + 2 = 4. There's another thought. Now, keep both of those in your mind. What about the thought that 2 + 2 = 4? Where is it in relation to the thought that Houston won the series last night? Is it to the left of it, to the right of it, above it, behind it, below it? See, those speculations don't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to say one thought is spatially related to another one. And so this is what Descartes thinks about the mind, that the mind is like a mathematical point, but it's not located in Newtonian space. But the problem is, in order for anything to causally interact with something else, like if you want to send something on that phone of yours from the screen, you're not going to do it by just looking at the screen and think of yourself as pushing the letter A. You've got to actually contact it, either with a stylus or with your finger. If a pool ball rolls into another one, it's going to contact it to move it. If I light a match, the striker has to contact it. And so he says, I'm an immaterial mind. Well, Cartesian minds aren't even located in Newtonian space. So this raises the question, if matter and mind are so different, how is it that the immaterial mind can cause the material body to move, like I'm moving my right arm? Or how is it that if I stub my toe, I have a feeling of pain, that a physical event causes a mental event? And it becomes very hard for Descartes to explain this. His conjecture that the pineal gland at the base of the brain is the locus of interaction between mind and body turns out to be something nobody wants to accept. There's no empirical evidence that that's the function of the pineal gland. Plus, what is the pineal gland? It's a material thing. In the end, Descartes has as much of a problem explaining how the non-material mind can move the pineal gland as he does in explaining how the mind can move the rest of the body. So the thing is, this raises the traditional mind-body problem, which to this day is something that philosophers throw back in the face of anybody who thinks that we're a dual entity, an immaterial spirit or soul and a material body. Now here's where Descartes broke some new ground. We'll see this a little more in the Empiricists, but he says, what do I mean by my thinking? He says, I basically am a mind in which various processes occur that are analogous to bodily processes. Functions occur like doubting, understanding something, affirming or denying, imagining, having sense perceptions. This became the basis of what later was called faculty psychology, that the mind has various processes, immaterial mental processes going on inside it that are analogous to bodily processes like circulation of blood and what your body does to take in oxygen, or. So for Descartes, the mind, as the 20th century philosopher Gilbert Ryle pointed out, is like an immaterial machine in which various processes happen that are analogous to bodily processes. Now, we only have a few. So, now here he tries to say that however I know a material thing, I also know my mind better. We have three. Like the piece of wax, Descartes tries to say it's the mind that lets me know that a melted piece of wax, where all the properties that my senses can perceive have changed, he says, how do I know it's the same wax? It must be through the mind alone and not through what my senses tell me, So reason gives us an insight. And so he says, I can know the self better than I know that I have a body. This is the opposite of what most of us would think, right? For many of us, even if we believe that we have an immaterial soul or we are one, we might say, well, that's a matter of faith, but I know I have a material body. I can see the parts of my body. But Descartes says, whatever we use to affirm the existence of a material object like our body or the piece of wax, it also affirms our existence as a thinking mind. So Descartes trying to convince us of the opposite of what most of us have believed, that we should be more confident that we are an immaterial mind than that we are a physical being, a material body. I'm going to leave it there. And when we go to empiricism, I'll talk about where Descartes tries to take this. But Wednesday and Friday we'll do review. Again, the test on Monday. Make sure you have a Scantron and make sure you turn in your essay on time. Bye-bye.